My family forged millions in medical debt to steal my inheritance. My name is Emma Collins, and I never imagined my own family would betray me over land that has been in our bloodline for generations. I am 35 years old, a corporate attorney in Seattle, the daughter of a Montana cattle rancher, and now the victim of an elaborate scheme to rob me of my birthright. The morning I received the call about my father started like any other Tuesday. Alarm at 5:30. Premium coffee from the machine that cost more than my first car. Smoothie with organic berries and protein powder. A quick scan of overnight emails from international clients. The life I had carefully constructed over the past decade since law school. The life that kept me safely distant from Montana and the complications of family. My corner office overlooked Puget Sound, floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed Seattle in all its moody glory. Rain misted the glass as I prepared for a conference call with investors from Singapore. My assistant Caroline knocked twice before entering. Her expression told me everything before she spoke. She said there was an emergency call, something about my father. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. The smooth corporate veneer I had perfected cracked just slightly. I had been away from the Rocking Sea Ranch for 5 years. My legal career became my excuse to stay distant from my father after our last explosive argument. We were both stubborn that way, both Collins to the core. Robert Collins believed his daughter belonged on the ranch, carrying on the family tradition. I believed I needed to create my own path, away from his shadow, away from the expectations that had suffocated me since childhood. The argument ended with words we both regretted. Words neither of us were willing to take back first. Caroline placed the phone in my hand with a grave expression. Uncle Frank was on the other end. His voice cracked as he told me Dad was gone. Just like that. No warning, no chance to say goodbye, no opportunity to heal the rift between us. A massive heart attack at 62, found by Charlie Wilkins in the South pasture near the old cottonwood tree. The same tree where I used to read books on summer afternoons, where Dad taught me to ride my first horse, where we shared our last civil conversation before everything fell apart. I remember sitting in my ergonomic office chair staring at the Seattle skyline as Uncle Frank continued speaking. Words about funeral arrangements, about the will, about family expectations. The corporate attorney in me took notes mechanically. The daughter in me felt nothing. Numbness serving as protective armor against the grief lurking just beneath the surface. I told Frank I would book the next flight to Bozeman. He said the family would be waiting, the word family sticking in my throat like a bitter pill. The partners were understanding about my sudden departure, offering condolences and assurances that my cases would be covered, that my place was secure, that family matters came first. Empty platitudes from people who measured life in billable hours, who saw personal tragedies as inconvenient interruptions to productivity. I had become one of them. The realization hit me as I packed an overnight bag. When had I started viewing human connections as inefficient distractions? The flight to Bozeman was delayed due to weather. Mechanical issues compounded the problem. I sat in the terminal watching the minutes tick away, knowing I would miss the funeral, the final opportunity to see my father, to say the words we had both been too proud to speak for 5 long years. I called Uncle Frank from the airport. He sounded tired, older than his 59 years. He assured me they would wait, as long as possible. But Montana weather was unpredictable in early spring. The cemetery was 30 miles from town. Roads could become impassable quickly. They would need to proceed without me. I arrived too late for the funeral. My flight was delayed, Montana weather being unpredictable in early spring. The ranch looked exactly as I remembered. 6,000 acres of rolling grassland backed against the mountains. The weathered sign at the entrance still proclaimed Rocking Sea Ranch, established 1908. My great-grandfather carved that sign himself. Dad refused to replace it, even as the letters faded. Heritage matters more than appearances. That was his philosophy. The rental car seemed out of place on the muddy ranch road, a compact foreign model instead of the sturdy trucks that normally navigated these ruts and bumps. City shoes sank into the spring mud as I made my way to the main house. The house my great-grandfather built, expanded by my grandfather in the 50s, modernized slightly by my father in the 90s, each generation adding their mark while preserving what came before. Legacy in wooden beams and riverstone foundation. The house was filled with neighbors and family when I arrived, their black attire contrasting with the warm wood paneling of our family home. Conversations stopped when I entered. I was the prodigal daughter returned too late, the successful attorney who abandoned her roots, the Collins heir who rejected her birthright, judgments in every gaze, in the silence that fell like a heavy curtain. I removed my designer sunglasses, straightened my shoulders, prepared to face what I had avoided for 5 years. Uncle Frank approached first, his weathered face showing more lines than I remembered. Grief had aged him overnight, the perpetual shadow to my father's light now standing alone. He said he was glad I made it, even if I missed the service. I replied that I wished I had been there. He nodded and said Dad would have understood. I asked if he really would have. My voice must have betrayed my doubt. Frank replied that Robert Collins was many things but never unforgiving, that in his final years he spoke of me often, with pride despite our differences, that he kept newspaper clippings of my cases in his desk drawer, that the framed photo of my law school graduation never left his bedside table. Each word a knife, of regret twisting deeper. Each revelation of my father's continued love, despite my absence, more painful than condemnation would have been. Aunt Judith approached next, my father's older sister, the family matriarch since my mother passed when I was 12. Her smile never reached her eyes. It never had. She said my appearance was quite the surprise after so many years away. I told her I came as soon as I heard the news. She commented that 5 years away and I still could not make it for the actual service. The accusation was clear in her tone. Uncle Frank intervened, saying this was not the time. The tension was palpable. Judith had never approved of my ambitions beyond the ranch. In her worldview, women managed households, not corporations. They supported family legacies, not created independent achievements. My success in law school and beyond was treated as a temporary deviation, a phase to outgrow before accepting my real responsibilities to family tradition. I had disappointed her by persisting in my independence, by refusing to conform to her narrow definition of a Collins woman. A man in an expensive suit approached and introduced himself as Mike Turner from Horizon Development. He explained that he and my father had been discussing opportunities for the ranch. I asked if he was really doing this at my father's funeral. I walked away before he could respond. That was when I noticed Charlie Wilkins watching me from across the room, the ranch foreman. Dad always said Charlie was worth his weight in gold, one of the few people my father truly trusted. Charlie looked much the same as I remembered. Mid-30s, quiet competence in his stance, eyes that missed nothing. He had started as a seasonal hand during college, worked his way up to foreman by 28. Dad once commented that Charlie understood cattle and land the way some people understood stock markets or legal precedents, instinctively, completely. I had always respected Charlie even when we disagreed, even when he sided with my father during our arguments about the future of ranching. The hours passed slowly. Neighbors offered condolences and reminiscences, stories about my father that portrayed a man somewhat different from the one I had battled, more patient with others than he had been with his headstrong daughter, more willing to adapt than our final arguments suggested, more vulnerable than his stoic exterior revealed. I accepted casseroles and sympathy with equal discomfort, playing the role of grieving daughter while trying to reconcile these new perspectives with my entrenched memories. The attorney had requested we meet in my Father's office after the guests departed. Walter Green had handled the Collins family affairs for 30 years. His face was grim as Uncle Frank and I sat across from him. Walter said my father had made some unusual changes to his will shortly before his passing. My stomach tightened. I asked what kind of changes. Walter slid a document across the desk. The ranch and all assets would transfer to me, not to the family trust as previously arranged. My father had always maintained that the ranch belonged to the Collins family, not to any individual, that we were stewards, not owners, that each generation held it in trust for those who would follow. The family trust was his mechanism for ensuring this philosophy continued after his death, for preventing any single person from selling or subdividing the legacy. Now he had apparently reversed this fundamental belief, placing everything directly in my hands. It made no sense. Uncle Frank looked as surprised as I felt. I asked for clarification. The property was not going into the family trust. Walter confirmed it would come directly to me, but with a condition. The ranch came with debt, medical debt. I was confused. Dad had insurance. Walter handed me a thick folder containing $2.8 million in medical bills accumulated over the past 3 years. I said that was impossible. Dad never mentioned any health problems during our occasional phone calls. Walter continued explaining the terms. The will stipulated I had 30 days to settle these debts, or the ranch would transfer to the family trust under Aunt Judith's management. 30 days to come up with almost $3 million. Uncle Frank muttered under his breath, wondering what my father had been thinking. Walter added that the property could not be sold or leveraged during this period. So either I miraculously found $3 million, or I lost everything. Walter confirmed that was the situation. The legal implications were clear, even as the personal ones remained murky. My father had created an impossible situation, a test. I was designed to fail, a way to punish me for leaving, perhaps, or a final attempt to force me to choose between my career and the ranch, between the life I had built and the legacy he valued above all else. The attorney in me recognized the trap. The daughter in me felt the betrayal anew. That night I sat in my childhood bedroom reviewing the medical bills. The room remained unchanged since my departure. Debate trophies on the bookshelf, FFA ribbons, pinned to a corkboard, law school acceptance letters framed on the wall. A timeline of ambitions that had carried me away from this place. That had created the distance my father seemingly punished me for with this final impossible choice. Something caught my eye as I examined the medical documentation. I compared signatures on different documents. They did not match. Some showed the precise penmanship I recognized as my father's. Others displayed subtle differences, inconsistent pressure, altered slant, variations that my corporate litigation experience had taught me to recognize as potential forgery. A knock at the door interrupted my analysis. Charlie entered with a cup of coffee. He said he thought I could use it. I thanked him. Charlie looked at the papers spread across my bed. He stated firmly that my dad was not sick. I asked what he meant. Charlie explained that the bills seemed suspicious because my father had been as healthy as a horse until the heart attack. I asked what the bills were for then. Charlie said that was what he had been wondering too. Charlie elaborated that he had driven my father to every medical appointment for the past 5 years, a precaution after Dad injured his hip in a fall from a horse. There had been regular checkups, a minor procedure for cataracts last summer, nothing requiring specialized treatment or extended hospital stays, nothing that would generate bills of this magnitude. He suggested we start checking with the medical facilities listed on the invoices, confirming whether my father had actually been a patient, whether these treatments had actually occurred. Sleep evaded me despite exhaustion. The familiar sounds of the ranch at night, both comforting and unsettling. Coyotes calling in the distance, wind brushing against the windows, cattle occasionally lowing in the night, sounds that had been the backdrop of my childhood. That belonged to a life I had deliberately left behind, yet they settled something within me that city noise never could. A connection to place that transcended time and absence. The next morning, I stood on the porch watching the sunrise over the land that had been in my family for generations. Charlie approached. I commented that I had forgotten how beautiful it was here. Charlie said my dad watched this sunrise every morning and never missed one. I asked Charlie to help me understand what was happening. He explained that Horizon Development had been trying to buy the ranch for years, but my father always refused. I noted that now I was facing impossible debt and a 30-day deadline. Charlie remarked that it was convenient timing for someone. I resolved to find out who was behind this. The corporate attorney in me recognized the contours of a deliberate scheme. The artificial deadline, the suspicious debt, the convenient transfer of power to Aunt Judith if I failed. All classic elements of fraudulent pressure designed to force a specific outcome. In this case, the sale of valuable property at below market value. I had prosecuted similar cases involving vulnerable seniors coerced into disadvantageous real estate transactions, never imagining I would find myself the target of comparable manipulation. Charlie offered his complete assistance. He knew every inch of the ranch, every aspect of its operations, every person connected to its management, including those who might have reason to want control transferred away from me. He suggested we start with a systematic review of the ranch finances, checking for irregularities that might connect to the mysterious medical bills. For evidence of who might be manipulating the situation for their benefit, we began in my father's office. The space still held his presence strongly. Leather chair worn in places that matched his frame. Reading glasses resting on half-finished paperwork. Coffee mug from my law school graduation still holding pencils on the corner of the desk. A shrine to a life suddenly interrupted, to plans left incomplete. I hesitated at the threshold. Charlie noticed and suggested we could start elsewhere. I entered anyway. Grief was a luxury I could not afford with a 30-day deadline looming. The financial records were meticulously organized as I expected. Dad approached ranch management with the same discipline he applied to everything. Expenses tracked to the penny, income documented precisely. Tax records arranged by year in labeled binders. On the surface, everything appeared in order. But Charlie pointed out subtle discrepancies when we examined the most recent years more closely. Checks written to cash in irregular amounts, withdrawals, without corresponding expense notations. Small individually, but significant in aggregate. Approximately $300,000 over 3 years. I spent the next week examining ranch financial records, visiting the local hospital and speaking with administrators, inspecting cattle operations with Charlie. I confronted Aunt Judith at her home, waving documents that contained inconsistencies. I discovered hidden files in my father's desk that painted a disturbing picture. The local hospital confirmed my father had only been treated for routine matters. The cataract surgery, quarterly checkups for his blood pressure, a tetanus booster after a fence repair incident last fall. Nothing consistent with the extensive treatments detailed in the suspicious bills. The administrator seemed troubled by my questions, by the implication that someone might be using their facility name for fraudulent purposes. She promised to alert their compliance department and provide any assistance required for my investigation. Charlie and I inspected the cattle operation thoroughly. The herd numbers matched the financial records. No evidence of unreported sales or missing livestock that might explain the financial discrepancies. The equipment inventory aligned with purchase records and depreciation schedules. The ranch itself appeared to be operating efficiently and profitably, despite the financial drain hidden in the accounting irregularities. The confrontation with Aunt Judith occurred on day 7 of my investigation. I drove to her home on the edge of town, a modest house she had shared with her late husband before his passing a decade ago. The home where her son Tyler still lived, despite being well into his 30s. I brought documentation of the inconsistencies in the ranch finances, the confirmation from medical facilities that my father had never received the treatments described in the suspicious bills. Judith answered the door with obvious reluctance, her expression shifting from false welcome to guarded defensiveness as I explained the purpose of my visit. I asked directly about her knowledge of the financial irregularities, about her involvement in the suspicious medical bills, about the convenient timing of the will amendment that would transfer control to her if I failed to resolve the manufactured debt crisis. She dismissed my concerns as desperate attempts to escape legitimate obligations. She claimed my father had confided health problems to her that he had kept from others, that he had sought experimental treatments not covered by insurance, that he had wanted to protect his privacy by keeping these matters confidential. Her explanations were plausible on the surface, but contradicted everything I knew about my father. About his pragmatic approach to health, about his transparency with Charlie regarding medical appointments, about his fundamental honesty in all matters. As our conversation grew more heated, Tyler appeared from the back of the house. His defensive posture and hostile expression immediately raised my suspicions. He accused me of harassing his mother, of attempting to shirk financial responsibilities, of being the same selfish person who abandoned family for career advancement in the city. His accusations mirrored Judith's so precisely they seemed rehearsed, a coordinated response to deflect legitimate questions. I left with more questions than answers, but also with stronger suspicions. The identical talking points, the shared defensiveness, the complete absence of surprise at my allegations, all suggested prior knowledge and coordination, all pointed toward deliberate deception rather than innocent misunderstanding. I shared my impressions with Charlie as we drove back to the ranch. He nodded grimly and mentioned that Tyler had a gambling problem that had worsened in recent years, that Judith had repeatedly covered his debts with unexplained sources of funds. A potential motive began to crystallize. The hidden files in my father's desk provided the most damning evidence. A locked drawer yielded to persistent effort, revealing a private investigation file. Dad had apparently noticed the financial discrepancies himself, had begun documenting irregularities approximately 6 months before his death, had even hired a private investigator from Billings to track the missing funds. The investigator's preliminary report indicated cash withdrawals being converted to cashier's checks. Those checks then deposited into an account belonging to Tyler Collins. My father had been investigating his own nephew for embezzlement when he died. The heart attack that claimed his life occurred the day after he received this preliminary report. The timing could be coincidental. The stress of discovering family betrayal potentially contributing to his cardiac event, or something more sinister might have occurred. The files did not provide definitive answers, but raised disturbing possibilities. At the bank, the manager apologized that without collateral they could not approve a loan to cover the medical debt. I protested that the ranch was worth 10 times the amount. The manager reminded me that according to the will, I could not use it as collateral. This was a deliberate trap. The bank manager was sympathetic, but constrained by the explicit terms of the will. No loans using ranch property as collateral. No sale of assets during the 30-day resolution period. No external financing secured by future proceeds from ranch operations. Every conventional avenue for raising the necessary funds blocked by careful legal language. Language specifically designed to ensure my failure. To force the transfer of control to Judith. To facilitate the eventual sale to Horizon Development, most likely. Walking the cattle fields with Charlie, I suggested selling part of the herd. He calculated it would barely make a dent in the debt. I mentioned the southeast parcel, which was not technically part of the original ranch deed. Charlie pointed out that Judith would still need to approve as co-trustee. We both knew that would never happen. Charlie explained that even liquidating, the entire herd would generate less than $1 million, far short of the $2.8 million in fraudulent debt. The southeast parcel might bring another 800,000, but required trust approval for any sale. The deliberate constraints of the amended will created a perfect trap, one designed by someone with intimate knowledge of ranch finances, someone with legal expertise or access to such expertise, someone determined to force a specific outcome regardless of my efforts. At the county records office, I discovered files showing multiple medical facilities that supposedly treated my father. I called each one. None had any record of Robert Collins ever being treated there. I made detailed notes, 5 different facilities with no record of my father. The pieces were beginning to fit together. The pattern of fraud became clearer with each call. Each medical facility confirmed my father had never been their patient, had never received the extensive treatments detailed in the bills, had never incurred the substantial charges now being used to threaten his legacy. The forged documents showed professional quality but contained subtle inconsistencies that only someone familiar with medical billing might notice. Different formatting conventions, inconsistent terminology, varying header designs, amateur mistakes that suggested someone copying examples rather than generating authentic documents. That night at the dining room table, I spread all the documents across the surface. I compared signatures using my phone to magnify details. These were not even good forgeries. Someone had been careless assuming I would simply accept the bills as legitimate. Under magnification, the signature variations became obvious. Different pressure points, inconsistent letter formation, varying slant angles, classic indicators of forgery I had encountered in corporate fraud cases. The forger had become increasingly careless over time, the earliest examples showing careful attention to detail, the later ones displaying rushed execution and obvious discrepancies, as if they believed their scheme was succeeding and grew overconfident. Or perhaps as they needed to generate increasing numbers of false documents to support the growing fictional debt. I met Uncle Frank at the local diner the next day. I told him someone had forged the bills. Dad was never treated at these facilities. Frank examined the papers with concern. He asked who would do this. I replied that it was someone who wanted me to fail, someone who stood to gain when I lost the ranch. Frank had always been the quiet one in the family, the younger brother who stood in my father's shadow. He looked genuinely troubled by my discovery. He said this changed everything. He asked what I planned to do. I told him I was calling a family meeting that evening. Uncle Frank suggested involving the county sheriff, filing formal fraud charges based on the evidence we had accumulated. I explained my reluctance to take that step immediately. Family matters becoming public record in a small community would damage reputations beyond repair, would potentially impact innocent parties connected to the guilty, would permanently alter family relationships that might otherwise be salvageable. I wanted one opportunity to resolve this privately before pursuing legal remedies. Frank nodded, understanding my perspective, but cautioned against excessive mercy where none had been shown to me. The atmosphere in the living room was tense. I had gathered Uncle Frank, Charlie, Aunt Judith, and Judith's son, Tyler. I revealed what I had discovered. The medical bills were forgeries. Judith immediately dismissed this as ridiculous, claiming Robert had been ill for years. I countered that every facility I contacted had no record of him. Tyler suggested they might have lost the records. I asked if all 5 facilities could have lost records and pointed out the signature discrepancies on every form. Judith stood, abruptly saying this was absurd. She accused me of trying to get out of paying my father's debts. I maintained these were not his debts. Someone had created them to force me to lose the ranch. Judith stormed out, claiming she would not listen to such accusations. Tyler followed her, but not before giving me a cold look. After they left, Charlie confirmed finding evidence in the ranch accounts of checks made out to cash that coincided with the dates on the medical bills, but the amounts were much smaller, 10 or 20,000 at a time. Uncle Frank looked sick. He suspected what I was beginning to realize. Someone had been stealing from the ranch for years. Then when my father died, they saw an opportunity to take everything by creating fake medical debt that I could never pay off in time. I spent the next few days gathering evidence and consulting with a forensic accountant recommended by my firm. The forensic specialist reviewed the financial records remotely, confirming the systematic removal of funds from ranch accounts over a 3-year period, tracing the movement of money through various channels, documenting the ultimate destination in gambling establishments and personal accounts belonging to Tyler Collins. The findings were damning. Over the past 3 years, approximately $300,000 had been embezzled from the ranch. The forged medical bills totaling $2.8 million were created to hide the theft and ensure the ranch would fall under Judith's control. But who was responsible? Judith had been the ranch bookkeeper for decades. She had access to the accounts and my father's signature. Tyler had gambling debts, according to Charlie. Motive and opportunity aligned perfectly. The forensic accountant suggested the scheme likely began as simple embezzlement, small amounts taken periodically with the intention of eventual repayment perhaps. But as the gambling addiction worsened, the theft accelerated. The amounts increased. The possibility of repayment diminished. Then my father's death presented both a crisis and an opportunity. A crisis because his private investigation would have soon uncovered the fraud. An opportunity because his passing created a chance to cover the smaller theft with a much larger fictional debt, to transfer control away from me to Judith, to eventually sell to Horizon Development and solve all financial problems while concealing the original crime. I met with Walter privately, showing him the evidence. He was shocked. He admitted the EI. Medical debt provision had been added to the will during a revision he did not personally oversee. One of his junior associates handled it while he was on vacation. Judith had brought in the amendment, supposedly at my father's request. Walter was devastated at being used as an instrument in this fraud. The attorney appeared genuinely distressed at his unwitting role in the scheme. He explained that the junior associate who processed the amendment had no reason to question its authenticity. Judith had presented what appeared to be proper documentation, had claimed my father was too ill to appear in person, had used her position as sister and bookkeeper to establish credibility. The amendment had been processed according to standard procedures, but without the usual personal oversight Walter would have provided had he been present. Walter offered his complete cooperation with any legal proceedings I might initiate. He provided access to the junior associate who had processed the amendment. The young lawyer confirmed Judith's role in submitting the documents, described her unusual insistence on immediate processing, recalled her explanation that my father was undergoing medical treatments that prevented his personal appearance, all supporting the conclusion that she had deliberately orchestrated the fraudulent amendment to facilitate the transfer of control. With 12 days remaining before the deadline, I made my move. I invited Mike Turner from Horizon Development to the ranch. Judith arrived uninvited, as I suspected she would. Mike presented his offer for the property, $20 million. More than I had imagined. Judith smiled triumphantly, assuming I was giving up. The meeting took place in the main ranch house living room, the space where generations of Collins family had made important decisions, where my great-grandfather had negotiated cattle contracts during the Depression, where my grandfather had refused offers from developers in the 70s, where my father had consistently declined proposals that would have fragmented the legacy he cherished. The setting added weight to the momentous nature of what was unfolding. Mike Turner presented a professional proposal, glossy brochures showing proposed development plans, architectural renderings of luxury homes positioned to maximize mountain views, financial projections indicating substantial returns on investment, conservation easements protecting certain portions of the property, all carefully designed to appeal to environmental and financial concerns simultaneously. To present development as progress rather than destruction. I listened attentively, asked relevant questions, appeared genuinely interested in the opportunity. Judith observed, with poorly concealed satisfaction. Her presence uninvited but unsurprising. Her expression revealing her assumption that I was capitulating to financial pressure, that her scheme was working as intended, that the legacy she coveted would soon be under her control. She interjected occasionally with comments supporting the proposal, with observations about the financial benefits to the family trust, with thinly veiled references to the looming debt deadline, each comment confirming her role in the conspiracy more definitively. I thanked Mike for his time and interest. Then, I informed him I would not be selling. Judith looked stunned. I explained that I had filed fraud charges with the county prosecutor. The medical bills were forgeries. The debt did not exist. Judith turned pale. I produced the forensic accountants, report showing the systematic theft from the ranch accounts. I had bank records showing deposits to Tyler's personal accounts matching the missing funds. Mike Turner looked from Judith to me with growing comprehension, the professional demeanor slipping slightly to reveal genuine surprise. He had apparently been an unwitting participant in their scheme. A legitimate businessman approached at a strategically advantageous moment. Not a conspirator, but an opportunist perhaps. He gathered his materials, making a hasty but dignified exit, promising to contact me at a more appropriate time if I ever reconsidered the development opportunity, leaving Judith to face the consequences of her actions without external support. Judith insisted there was a misunderstanding. I had evidence of her son stealing from his own family for years, evidence of her creating fraudulent medical bills to cover the theft and take control of the ranch. I had recordings of calls with the medical facilities confirming my father was never a patient. I had the junior associate from Walter's office ready to testify about the irregular will amendment. Uncle Frank watched silently as I laid out the case. Judith broke down. She admitted that Tyler had taken the money. His gambling debts had spiraled, out of control. She created the medical bills to protect him. She believed I would simply sell the ranch to cover the debt and move back to Seattle. The ranch would go to the family trust, to Tyler, his birthright as she saw it, even though he was not a Collins by blood. The confession emerged in stages, first denial, then minimization, suggestions that I misunderstood the situation, that the evidence was circumstantial, that alternative explanations existed. But as I methodically addressed each deflection with documented facts, the pretense crumbled. Tears replaced defiance. Rationalization replaced denial. Judith claimed maternal love as her motivation, protection of her only child, preservation of family legacy through the only line she believed would continue it. My childless professional life representing a dead end for the Collins name in her traditional worldview. I told her family does not steal from family. The ranch was my legacy, my father's legacy, not a gambling chip for Tyler. I offered her a choice: resign from the family trust and convince Tyler to confess and enter rehab, or face criminal charges that would send them both to prison. She asked what would happen to them, where would they go? I said I was not heartless. The North Section cabin would remain theirs, but they would have no say in ranch business ever again. Uncle Frank supported my position, adding his perspective as the last remaining sibling, as someone who had witnessed the family history from within rather than from my partially estranged position. He expressed profound disappointment in Judith's choices, in her willingness to betray not just me, but the memory and wishes of their brother. The fundamental values that had guided the Collins family for generations. His quiet condemnation seemed to affect Judith more deeply than my legal threats, representing a moral judgment from a peer rather than punishment from an adversary. The confrontation concluded with a fragile agreement. Judith would resign her position with the family trust, effective immediately. Tyler would enter a residential treatment program for his gambling addiction. Full restitution would be arranged for the embezzled funds through a structured payment plan. The fraudulent will amendment would be formally invalidated through proper legal channels, Criminal charges would remain a suspended threat dependent on complete compliance with these conditions. A conditional mercy balancing justice with family preservation. 2 weeks later, the ranch operations were back on track. Charlie proved invaluable as we restructured. Uncle Frank stepped up to help with the business side, showing hidden talents my father had never recognized. We discovered opportunities to modernize certain aspects while preserving the ranching traditions that mattered. The legal process of correcting the fraudulent will provisions proceeded smoothly with Walter Green's dedicated assistance. His desire to rectify his office's unwitting role in the deception evident in his thorough and expedited handling of the necessary documentation. The amended will restored my father's original intentions. The ranch transferred to me personally, but with conservation easements ensuring its continued operation as an integrated agricultural property. Development rights restricted to prevent future fragmentation. The legacy protected by legal guardrails rather than by family trust oversight, which had proven vulnerable to manipulation. I took a leave of absence from my firm. The mountains and open spaces called to me in a way the Seattle skyline never had. Standing on the porch watching another Montana sunset, I finally understood what my father meant about legacy. It was not just the land. It was the people, the commitment, the integrity passed down through generations. My father and I were too similar. Both stubborn, both driven, both Collins to the core. In protecting his legacy, I found my own. I wonder now how many of you have faced betrayal from those you should be able to trust the most. Family should be our foundation. But what happens when that foundation cracks? How do you rebuild what was broken while preserving what matters most? 3 months have passed since I uncovered the truth about my family. The ranch has become my sanctuary, my purpose. The corporate attorney in Flowers me still exists, but she no longer defines who I am.